The buckboard lurched hard to the right, and when the wheels found flat ground again, Ruth Calloway did not look back. She kept her eyes on the road ahead, the long pale scar of it cutting through the New Mexico scrubland, and she told herself she had done what needed doing. She told herself that plenty of times, all the way to the next town, and the time after that. She told herself right up until she stopped being able to hear the crying. The girl had been standing in the road when the wagon disappeared around the bend, bare feet in the dust, a flour sack tied at the neck with a piece of twine, holding everything she owned in the world. A doll made of corn husk that was already falling apart at the seams, and a tin cup that had belonged to her father. Her name was Clara Briggs. She was 9 years old, and she was entirely, completely alone. Stay with me until the very last word. The man who found her was not looking for anyone. Elias Holt had been riding the same stretch of the Cimarron Road since before sunup, checking fence line on the eastern edge of his property, 3,000 acres of red grass and cedar that he had built up over 30 years and nearly lost twice. He was 54 years old, broad through the shoulders but slow in the right knee, and he had not spoken more than a dozen words to another living soul in the better part of 6 weeks, which suited him fine. He heard her before he saw her, not crying. That surprised him later, when he thought back on it. Any other child would have been crying, but what he heard instead was a low, steady sound, almost like humming, but not quite, and when he crested the small rise in the road, he saw her sitting cross-legged in the middle of the dirt track, rocking just barely. The way you rock when you are trying to comfort yourself, and there is no one else to do it for you. Elias pulled his horse to a stop. The girl looked up at him. Her face was sun-scorched and dusty, and her lips were cracked from thirst, but her eyes were steady, dark brown and still, the kind of still that only comes from a child who has learned very early that panic does not help anything. She said, "My wagon left without me." Elias looked down the road in both directions. Nothing, not even a dust trail. He looked back at the girl. How long ago? Don't know. The sun was higher. He judged the angle of light. 2 hours, maybe more. He looked at her feet, no shoes, no stockings, and at the cracked skin around her mouth, and at the flour sack that held everything she owned. You got family somewhere? She thought about that for a moment, longer than a child should have to think about it. No, sir, she said. Elias Holt was not a man who made quick decisions. He was the kind of man who turned a problem over for a good long while before he acted, because he had learned the hard way that acting fast and acting right were rarely the same thing. But there was nothing to turn over here. There was a child in the middle of a desert road with no shoes and cracked lips and no family. He put out his hand. She looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then she took it. The Holt Ranch sat in a wide, shallow valley about 4 miles off the main road, and by the time they reached it, the girl had fallen asleep against Elias's arm, still holding the corn-husk doll pressed to her chest. He carried her inside and laid her on the cot in the back room, the small room off the kitchen that he used for storage now, but that had once been a boy's room, with a wooden horse on the windowsill and a name carved into the doorframe that he did not let himself look at directly anymore. He covered her with a wool blanket and went to find Agnes. Agnes Trujillo had cooked at the Holt Ranch for 11 years. She was 60 years old and 4'11", and she ran the kitchen like a general runs a campaign with total authority and no tolerance for inefficiency. She had outlasted 2 ranch foremen, 1 long drought, and a cattle fever that had taken a quarter of the herd, and she had done it all while producing biscuits of a quality that grown men had been known to become emotional about. When Elias came into the kitchen and said, "Agnes, there's a child in the back room," Agnes put down her spoon, wiped her hands on her apron, walked to the back room, looked at the girl for a long moment, and came back to the kitchen. "She needs water first," Agnes said, "then broth." "Not solid food yet. Look at her lips. How long was she out there?" 2 hours at least. Maybe more. Agnes made a sound in the back of her throat that communicated, very efficiently, exactly what she thought of whoever had left that child in the road. "Go do your fence," she said. "I'll handle this." This was, in Elias's experience, the most reassuring sentence in the English language. Clara woke to the smell of beans and wood smoke, and for a moment she did not know where she was. Then she heard someone moving in the next room, the steady, purposeful sounds of a kitchen being run, and she lay still and looked at the ceiling and the rough plank walls and the wooden horse on the windowsill. The horse was brown, painted on by hand, with a white blaze down its nose. Someone had made that horse with care. Agnes appeared in the doorway with a tin cup of broth. "Drink this," she said. "Slow." Clara sat up and took the cup and drank it slow, the way she was told. Agnes sat on the edge of the cot and watched her with the direct, assessing gaze of a woman who had seen a great deal of the world and had very few illusions left about it. "What's your name, child?" "Clara Briggs." "Where are your people, Clara Briggs?" Clara looked at the broth. "My mama died when I was little. My daddy died last spring. His sister Ruth came to get me." She paused. "She left me." Agnes said nothing for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was the same level, practical, but something behind her eyes had shifted. "How far did you travel with this woman?" 3 days. We were going to Tucson." "Do you know anyone in Tucson?" "No, ma'am. Ruth was going to leave me at the orphan home there." Agnes stood up and smoothed her apron. "You are not going to an orphan home today," she said. "Today you are going to drink that broth and then eat half a biscuit, and tomorrow we will figure out the rest. Do you understand?" Clara looked up at her. Something in her chest, something she had been holding very tightly for a very long time, loosened, just slightly. "Yes, ma'am," she said. Elias did not know what to do with a child. This was not false modesty. He genuinely did not know. He had known once, or he had been learning, slowly, the way you learn something that does not come naturally but that had been a long time ago, and the knowing had left him the same way the boy had left him, all at once, without warning, on a Tuesday morning in late October when the fever came and would not break. Thomas had been 7 years old. That was 8 years ago. Elias did not talk about it. He had never talked about it, not with Agnes, not with the men on the ranch, not with the pastor in town who had come to call 3 times in the first year and eventually stopped coming. He kept the grief in the way you keep a wound that you cannot afford to have attended to, pressed down, covered over, ignored, until you can almost convince yourself it isn't there. Almost. Clara was not Thomas. She was older, quieter, and possessed of a self-sufficiency that Thomas, sunny, loud, forever losing his shoes, had never had. She did not ask for things. She found ways to be useful. By the 3rd day, she was helping Agnes in the kitchen without being asked, sweeping the porch in the evenings, carrying water without being told. She did not talk much. Neither did Elias. They got along, in this way, carefully. On the 5th morning, he found her at the corral fence, watching the horses with the same still, measuring look she had given him the first time she saw him. "That one's Cracker," he said, stopping beside her. He pointed at the roan gelding in the far corner. "He bites. Don't put your fingers through the fence near him." "I know about horses," Clara said. "My daddy had 2. "What kind?" "Quarter horses. Bay." They stood there for a while, watching the horses move in the early light. "The brown one with the white face," Clara said. "What's his name?" Elias looked at the paint mare in the near corner. He had not named her. He had bought her 2 years ago from a rancher outside of Las Vegas, New Mexico, and he had just kept calling her the Paint. "Doesn't have one," he said. Clara considered this. "She looks like a Sunday to me," she said. Elias looked at the mare. He thought about arguing. He could not think of a reason. "Sunday," he said. "Fine." The letter came on a Thursday, 11 days after Clara arrived. It was from a man named Gerald Briggs, a cousin of Clara's father, living in Colorado. He had heard, through the winding channels of family gossip, that Ruth Calloway had taken the girl and was transporting her to an orphanage. He wanted to know the status of the situation. He was, the letter made clear, interested in the child's welfare. He was also, the letter made equally clear, interested in a small parcel of land in eastern Arizona that had belonged to Clara's father and now, by rights, belonged to Clara. Elias read the letter twice. He set it on the kitchen table. Agnes read it once, then set it down with a deliberateness that suggested she had more to say, but was choosing her words. "He doesn't say he wants the girl," Agnes said. "No, he doesn't. He says he wants to ensure her proper placement with family." I read it. "He spent more words on the land than on the child." Elias folded the letter and set it aside. He looked out the window at the yard, where Clara was feeding the chickens with the same methodical care she brought to everything, moving slowly along the fence, scattering the grain evenly, talking to the birds in a low voice that he could not quite hear. "I'm going to need to talk to someone in town," he said. "The judge," Agnes said. Or a lawyer first. Elias. Agnes turned from the window to look at him directly, which she only did when she felt he required looking at directly. That man is not coming here to care for that child. Elias picked up the letter again. I know, he said. The town of Reyes, New Mexico, had one lawyer, a judge who held court twice a month in the back room of the land office, and a sheriff named Beaumont who had been doing the job for 22 years and was possessed of a slow-moving, absolute fairness that Elias had always respected. Elias went to the lawyer first. The lawyer's name was Aldous Webb, and he was 30 years old and had studied in Street. Louis and came west for reasons he was vague about, and he was considerably sharper than he looked, which was useful in a small town where people tended to underestimate him. Elias laid out the situation. Webb listened without interrupting, which Elias appreciated. The girl has no legal guardian at present, Webb said, when Elias had finished. Ruth Calloway effectively abandoned her, which creates an opening, but it also means there is no clear custodial authority currently in place. The cousin's letter is a claim, but it's not a filing. He has not filed anything. Not yet. Not yet. What you need is a formal petition for emergency guardianship, filed before he files anything. It puts you in a stronger position when the judge looks at the situation. On what grounds? Webb looked at him steadily. On the grounds that you found a child dying in the road, brought her to safety, have been caring for her for nearly 2 weeks, and that she is well, safe, and established in your household, and that the alternative claimant has demonstrated no actual interest in the child beyond the property she stands to inherit. He paused. Those are not weak grounds, Mr. Holt. Elias was quiet for a moment. I'm not her family, he said. No, Webb said. But right now, you're the closest thing she has to one. Gerald Briggs arrived on a Wednesday, 6 days before the scheduled hearing. He was 41 years old, florid, and prosperous-looking, in the way of men who have made their money by watching other people do the difficult parts. He came with a woman he introduced as his wife, Eleanor, who had sharp eyes and said very little and seemed to be doing most of the actual thinking. They arrived at the Holt Ranch in a hired buggy and sat in the front room and looked at Clara with the bright, performative warmth of people who have prepared warmth in advance. Clara, Gerald said. My goodness, you've grown. Clara sat very straight in the chair across from them. She looked at him with those still brown eyes. I don't remember you, she said. Well, you were very small the last time. How old was I? Gerald blinked. Oh, perhaps 2 or 3. My daddy never mentioned a cousin, Gerald. There was a small silence. Eleanor's sharp eyes moved to Elias, then back to the girl. I imagine there are many things your father hadn't yet told you, Eleanor said. Her voice was smooth, practiced. You were so young. He talked to me a lot, Clara said. He told me about everyone. He didn't mention you. Another silence. Agnes, standing in the doorway to the kitchen, found something to wipe on her apron. Gerald recovered his warmth. We've come a long way, Clara. We want to make sure you're properly cared for. A young girl needs family. Mr. Holt is my guardian, Clara said. Well, temporarily, perhaps. He found me, Clara said. He didn't have to stop. He stopped. The room was quiet. Outside, a horse moved in the corral. A chicken said something opinionated from the yard. Elias, who had been leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, said nothing. He did not need to. Clara had said it. The night before the hearing, Clara could not sleep. Elias found her on the porch just before midnight, sitting on the top step with her knees pulled up and the cornhusk doll on her knee. The night was clear and enormous, the way nights in New Mexico are all stars and no ceiling. He sat down on the step beside her. They were quiet for a while. Are you scared? He said, finally. She thought about it. Yes, she said. Are you? He had not expected that. He considered lying. He decided not to. A little, he said. More quiet. A coyote said something distant and lonesome out past the cedar line. Mr. Holt, Clara said. Why did you stop? That day on the road. You didn't know me. Elias looked out at the dark for a long moment. He could feel the weight of the answer sitting in his chest. The real one, not the easy one. He thought about Thomas. He thought about a Tuesday morning in October. He thought about how the empty room down the hall had stayed empty for 8 years because he could not bring himself to change it, and how he had started looking at that carved name in the doorframe again, just in the last week or so, and how it had stopped hurting quite so sharply when he did. "I had a son," he said. "His name was Thomas. He was 7. He got sick." Clara said nothing. She was listening the way children listen when they know something important is being said. "I couldn't help him," Elias said. "I couldn't do a single thing. I just stood there and watched." He stopped for a moment. "I am not going to stand there again. Not if I can help it. Not if there's something I can do." Clara was quiet for a long time. Then she put her hand over his, her small, brown, work-roughened hand, over his big, scarred one, and she did not say anything, because there was nothing to say, and she seemed to understand that perfectly. They sat there together until the cold drove them inside. The hearing was held on a Friday morning in October. Judge Clarence Reeves had been on the bench in Reyes for 14 years. He was a careful man, unhurried, with a face like weathered limestone and an almost geological patience. He had seen a great many things pass through his courtroom, and very few of them surprised him anymore. Gerald Briggs was represented by a lawyer from Santa Fe, who had been expensive enough to be impressive and had a mustache that seemed to be doing a significant amount of professional work on his behalf. He argued, methodically, that blood relation constituted the superior claim, that a single man of advanced years was an unsuitable guardian for a young girl, that the Briggs family could offer Clara stability, schooling, and the company of proper family. He did not mention the land in Arizona. Webb had expected this, and had prepared accordingly. Webb argued the facts, the abandonment, the emergency. The 12 weeks of care, because it had been 12 weeks by then, the first hearing having been delayed by a land dispute that had taken priority on the docket. 12 weeks in which Clara had gained 8 pounds, learned to ride Sunday at a trot, started lessons with the school teacher who came out to the ranches twice a week, and had, by any measurable standard, flourished. Then the judge said he would like to speak with the child. Clara walked to the chair that had been set beside the judge's table, and sat down in it, and looked at Judge Reeves with those still brown eyes. She sat straight. She held her hands in her lap. Judge Reeves said, "Clara, I want you to understand that you are not in trouble. I am not going to be angry with anything you say. I want you to tell me the truth, just the plain truth, and nothing else. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," Clara said. "Do you know Mr. Gerald Briggs?" "I didn't, before he came to the ranch. I know him a little now." "And how did you come to be at Mr. Holt's ranch?" Clara told him. She told him about Ruth Calloway, and the 3 days of travel, and the wagon leaving, and the dust rising. She told it plainly, without embellishment or drama, the way a child tells a thing they have made peace with, not because it wasn't terrible, but because surviving it has given them a kind of ownership over it. She told him about waking up to the smell of beans and wood smoke. She told him about Agnes and the broth and the biscuits. She told him about Sunday the horse and the corral fence and Cracker who bit. Judge Reeves let her talk. When she stopped, he said, "Clara, if the court were to place you with Mr. Briggs and his family in Colorado, would you be safe?" Clara thought about this carefully. "Maybe," she said. "But sir, he wants my daddy's land." "Mr." Webb found the land office records. Mr. Briggs asked about the land 3 times before he asked about me. A sound went through the room, not loud, just the particular sound of a room shifting. "Mr. Holt stopped for me," Clara said. "He didn't know me. He didn't get anything from it. He just stopped." She paused. "I would like to stay where people stop." Judge Reeves looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his papers. Then he looked at Elias. Elias met his gaze and did not look away. Judge Reeves said, "The petition for permanent guardianship of the minor child Clara Briggs is hereby granted to Mr. Elias Holt of Reyes, New Mexico. The opposing claim is dismissed. The matter of the Arizona land parcel will be referred to the territorial court to be held in trust for the minor until she reaches the age of majority." He set down his papers. "This court is adjourned." Agnes had made a pie. This was not, she made clear, a celebration pie in any official sense. She had simply made a pie because it was Friday, and she generally made pie on Fridays. And if it happened to be apple, which was Clara's favorite, a fact Agnes had established within the first week that was purely a matter of what fruit was available. Nobody argued with this explanation. It was Agnes's explanation, and that was that. They ate the pie at the kitchen table. Elias and Clara and Agnes and Webb, who had been persuaded to stay, and Hector, the ranch foreman, who had come in from the barn when he saw the buggy gone and smelled the pie. Clara ate her slice, and half of a second slice that Agnes put on her plate without asking. And then she leaned back in her chair with the particular bonelessness of a child who is, for the first time in a long time, deeply at ease. Elias watched her from across the table. He thought about Thomas. He thought about the way grief had lived in him for 8 years, like a stone he could not put down, how he had carried it through every morning and every fence line and every season, and how he had believed, on some level, that he deserved to carry it forever, because he had stood there and not been able to help. He thought about a road, shimmering with heat, and a small girl sitting cross-legged in the dust, rocking herself slow. He thought about how she had looked at his outstretched hand for exactly 1 second. He thought about how it had felt when she took it. Something in his chest, something that had been clenched for 8 years, hard and cold, as a Winter Creek stone had been loosening slowly, without his noticing, and he noticed it now, not gone, not healed clean, but loosened, made bearable, given, somehow, a new shape. Agnes refilled his coffee without looking at him, which was her way of saying she had noticed, and was glad, and was not going to make a thing of it. Winter came early that year. The first snow arrived in late November, light and dry, and Clara stood on the porch and held out her hands and caught flakes on her palms and watched them disappear, and then she went inside and helped Agnes make soup because, she said, snow days were soup days. This being a rule she had just invented, and which Agnes did not dispute. Elias put up the snow fence along the north pasture, and Clara helped carry posts until he told her it was too cold and she should go inside. And she said she wasn't cold, and he said he wasn't asking, and she said fine, but she was going to watch from the fence. And he said that was acceptable. She watched from the fence. At Christmas, Agnes made tamales. This was not a negotiation. This was simply what happened at Christmas. Clara had never had tamales before, and Agnes treated this as a personal failing of Clara's previous circumstances, rather than anything Clara could be blamed for. And she taught Clara to fold the corn husks with the serious, transferring energy of a master craftsman passing on a trade. Clara was a good student. She folded them neatly. Agnes said they were acceptable. This was, from Agnes, high praise. On Christmas morning, Elias set something on the table in front of Clara, a package wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine, not elaborate. But the corners were folded carefully, the way you fold something when you want the person receiving it to know you took care. Clara looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. "Open it," he said. She untied the twine slowly, saving it, coiling it on the table beside her, the way you save things when you have learned not to take things for granted. She folded back the brown paper. Inside was a bridle, small, girl-sized, made of good dark leather and worked along the cheek strap with a simple pattern of small flowers. The bit was silver, Sunday's bridle, made to measure. He had ordered it from the saddle maker in Albuquerque 6 weeks ago. Clara looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she looked up at Elias, and something crossed her face, not a child's excitement, though that was there too, but something older, something that understood what the giving of it meant. "She's mine?" Clara said. "She's yours." Clara looked back down at the bridle in her hands. She ran her thumb along the stitched flower pattern very carefully. "Mr. Holt," she said, and then stopped. "Elias," he said. It was the first time he had said it like that as an offering. A door opened. She looked up. Her eyes were bright, but she did not cry, and he had learned by now that this was simply how she was feeling everything, and keeping herself steady in it, the way a good tree stands in wind. "Elias," she said. The name sounded, in her mouth, like something new, like something beginning. Agnes, at the stove, found something to stir. The spring came green and fast, the way spring comes after hard winters in New Mexico, sudden and total, like a decision that has been made. The horses moved differently in spring. Everything moved differently. The ranch came alive at the edges, slowly at first and then all at once, and Clara was in the middle of it, carrying, learning, riding, asking questions, answering them, becoming, inch by inch, a permanent feature of the place. She rode Sunday every morning before lessons. She had taken to it with an ease that Hector said was either natural talent or stubbornness, or most likely both. She sat a horse the way her father must have sat a horse upright, still, like she belonged there. On a morning in April, Elias was watching her come in from the north pasture Sunday, moving at a steady lope, Clara easy in the saddle, her dark hair loose in the wind, and he felt something that he had not expected to feel ever again. Not happiness, exactly. Or not only that, something larger. Something that included Thomas, and the grief, and the 8 years of carrying it, and this girl in the dusty road, and the fact that he had stopped not because he was a good man particularly, or a brave one, but because he had been there, and he had been able to, and those two things together had turned out to be enough. Enough to change her life, enough, as it had turned out, to change his. Clara brought Sunday to a stop at the fence and looked at him with those steady brown eyes. "The fence is down on the east side," she said. "Third post from the big cedar. I left a rock to mark it." Elias nodded. "Good eye," he said. Clara dismounted and led Sunday toward the barn, one hand resting easy on the mare's neck, the mare moving close to her the way a horse moves when it has chosen its person. Elias watched them go. The morning light lay long and gold across the red grass. Somewhere on the far side of the barn, Agnes was talking to the chickens, in a tone that suggested the chickens had been underperforming. A hawk turned slow circles over the cedar line. He stood there and let himself feel it, all of it, the grief and the gratitude, and the particular, aching gladness of a man who has been handed something he did not know he was still waiting for. He had stopped for a child in a dusty road. She had taken his hand. That was the whole of it. Really. That was the truth. Sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply stop. Not fix everything. Not have all the answers. Just stop and put out a hand. Elias didn't save Clara because he was extraordinary. He stopped because she was there and he was able. And those two things together turned out to be enough to heal them both. The kindness you offer freely is often the kindness that quietly saves you too. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of warmth and entertainment while carrying a small piece of hope worth keeping.